Welcome, everyone. I'm Alexander Stepanovich, founder of Cascades Analytics, a media and advisory platform covering the psychedelics and neuroplastogens pipeline. We go where the action is. We talk to the founders, the scientists, regulators, the people shaping the next wave of psychiatric drugs. My guest today has spent over 20 years building CNS drug development programs. She started at Eli Lilly, then moved to Pfizer as a neuroscience executive leading clinical development of well-known CNS drugs such as duloxetine, ziprasidone, pregabalin, and varenicline. Varenicline, yes. She then spent a decade at NIDA as a program director. She authored the Psychedelics RFA for substance use disorders and helped shape how the federal government thinks about clinical outcomes in addiction. Most recently, she was chief medical officer at Usona Institute, where she took their psilocybin program for major depressive disorder through phase 3 and 5-MeO-DMT for PTSD through phase 2. She's a physician scientist, a founding member of ISCTM, the International Society for CNS Clinical Trials and Methodology, and someone who has sat on both sides of the FDA table. Tanya Ramey, welcome to Cascades Analytic Live. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you, Alex.
You're welcome. So my first question for you is, what pulled you towards psychedelics after your time in conventional CNS drug development?
Well, I have recognized that we are the very consequential for neuroscience drug development moment. And we are at the important window of opportunity to move the field forward. I have spent my life mostly at Pfizer developing new antidepressants, and that was the last massive effort to improve on serotonergic mechanisms. Sertraline was approaching patent expiration, and we tried to create a bridge to move forward with new antidepressants. I remember we had efforts combining it with S-riboxetine, and we have had very novel designs. We combined sertraline with 5-HT1B antagonist. Also, the designs were quite novel. However, we encountered the sort of a ceiling in terms of the efficacy signal, as well as on response and remission. So for me, when I saw that psychedelics came up on board, and that was quite an opportunity to contribute to the field that finally moves beyond the typical serotonergic antidepressants. And also, psychedelics, they have very important features that serotonergic antidepressants did not possess. For example, starting from ketamine, loosely, one could see it as psychedelic, and then psilocybin. One could think about recent paper from Andrew van de Waart, first author. They have quite rapid anti-suicidality signal that is very important, I think, for the indications that we are in. One could say that when we develop serotonergic antidepressants, that we haven't included the actively suicidal patients into the trials, but maybe right now we could include them to kind of better characterize the anti-suicidal signal that psychedelics possess. And also the other feature that I see very interesting for psychedelics would be the distal socio-functional outcomes. And we could talk about that later, but this is also the very distinct feature that psychedelics as a class possess, and serotonergic mechanisms, typical and also dual mechanisms, they did not possess any of that. So I do care about that, and this is why I'm in this field right now.
Was it a particular study that grabbed your attention, or was it a gradual interest that grew progressively along the years?
I would say that it grabbed my attention in relation to addiction because it's very important to addiction. And I will talk about that later when we talked about addiction.
Right.
And also it kind of gradually grabbed my attention. And then I saw I think it was Jacob Adday publication on the major life changes. And so that's what I saw sort of as a validation of what I have seen with psychedelics, and that was critically important for addictions field.
And what's the sharpest difference you've seen clinically, therapeutically, regulatorily between developing those drugs and developing psilocybin?
The sharpest difference is if one would use music terminology would be that the tempo was like a walking pace for serotonergic mechanism called andante, and everybody was trying to improve on it, and they were trying to improve on it like incrementally, little by little. They looked at the sertraline, we looked at the venlafaxine, and we tried to improve on it. However, with the psychedelics, it was very different. We haven't heard about psychedelics for a long, long time. And suddenly, the field moved very quickly. It was, as I said, it was prestissima. Very quickly, a lot of tailwind. And everybody is trying all indications that mostly like stress-related indications. MDD, GAD, PTSD, all of that. And that is all done in a way that is sort of almost like simultaneous. That's very interesting, and that's the difference. There is not that path that goes gradually. It's very quick.
Is that because of the strength of the effect, you think, the robustness?
Difficult to say. Difficult to say, and why is that? Certainly, I would say that there have been some successes that mostly people experienced in their lives, and they may not have been obvious in the classical drug development field. They encountered these medications, these compounds, should I say, in other settings. And the dramatic effects that they have experienced that probably helped to create tailwinds for the current situations that we have, helped to create that executive order and that program CNPV voucher. It's just my speculation, but I think that the push was from the actually patients who didn't receive any help, and they needed to go to use other ways to receive help.
So you worked on MDD from the industry side and addiction from the government side. What does the evidence for psychedelics look like across those two indications? Where is it stronger and where is it thinner?
The stronger, the most amount of data, as I said, in the stress-related indications. In MDD, in GAD right now also, that's where the most amount of data. And whereas in the indications that I see personally as having very good fit for psychedelics, such as substance use disorders, addictions, there is relatively less amount of data. For example, as we know, the treatment-resistant depression program, it's at phase 3, right? Approaching FDA, and that is not happening yet with addictions. And there are several reasons for that I would like to explain, because they are not being addressed yet openly. in the field, but they need to be, because I think that psychedelics is overall, they have a potential for substance use disorders. First of all, I would say that in terms of endpoints, depression endpoints, GAD endpoints, even PTSD endpoints, they are based on, on subjective. If there is a patient-reported instrument, patient feels it in, right? Subjective. If there is a, sort of a impartial intermediary, then the rater rates the subject, but still sort of subjective. With the addictions, we have objectively based endpoints, and such as, you need to have urinalysis, you need to have metabolites to prove that you haven't taken the drug, right? So this is very objective, and that makes it harder. Paradoxically, these are the harder endpoints because they are more objective in comparison with other neuroscience indications. That's one thing. The other thing is that there are differences in terms of how we approach addiction drug development. One difference is that very early on in the clinical development program, one needs to have a drug-drug interaction study. This is a step that, for example, depression program wouldn't go through, right? So you would need to have to clear, in quotation marks, that field, that your drug of abuse together with your compound, they do not create any safety issues that are very important. Can you imagine ibogaine in this kind of situation, right? So then that kind of magnifies an issue of complexity. First of all, more objective endpoints. Second of all, this drug-drug interaction study with the drug of abuse as a hurdle. And that is very important in comparison with the more sort of a soft, should I say, development programs for indications such as depression, such as anxiety. Then I would say there is an issue of heterogeneity. That struck me when I came to NIDA, to addiction field, even though I was involved with varenicline, that kind of didn't come to that amount of interest for me. But when I entered the addiction field, really 100%, then I saw that the heterogeneity is tremendous. For example, it has been even calculated mathematically that, for example, if you take opioid use disorder, moderate to severe, one would, based on DSM-5 criteria, one could have about 1,000 possible combinations to enter the clinical trial. Certainly, that shows you the enormity of heterogeneity that could consume any efficacy signal.
1,000 of criteria? 1,000 different criteria?
1,000 different combinations of those criteria that opioid use disorder is constituted from. Okay, and so that is an issue. That is an issue. What I have decided to do, I have decided to develop, and actually I did that at Pfizer also, try to do that, to do deep phenotyping, bring it to addiction, because that could allow, for example, use deep phenotyping batteries at screening and somehow decrease the level of heterogeneity and improve chances for success in such trials. So these are three issues that I see as major. And however,
Mhm.
You see those major issues. However, you see that for psychedelics that, as I said, have those important distal life-changing aspects. And they also have, you don't need to take the drug every day, right? You have like 1 or 2 sessions looking at compass. That's likely what is going to happen. So that's very, very much fitting the addiction field. So where you wouldn't need to take the drug every day for an indefinite period of time, you would have 1 or 2 sessions, and you would be able to break the habit, so to speak, the addiction habit. That is very attractive, and yet in this field we have the least amount of data, I would say, in comparison with the depression, anxiety, and PTSD.
And where is the evidence for psychedelics in addiction still weakest?
I would say that it's still weakest where we need it most. Another paradox, that the addictions which are less sort of lethal, arguably less lethal, such as alcohol use disorder, such as tobacco, we have the most information in those, especially tobacco. Matt Johnson produced quite dramatic results in his Johns Hopkins ran trial. While the, for example, fields, opioid use disorder, I think it's still pre-evidential. So there are several trials which are being run, but I don't think that I have seen any conclusive data. For cocaine use disorder, that's another important issue. For cocaine use disorder, Peter Hendricks just published in JAMA, just recently, very recently published in JAMA. So we have some phase 2 information on cocaine use disorder, and there is nothing on methamphetamine. Nothing on methamphetamine. That's where stimulants is the weakest link. If not for Peter Hendricks' study, we would be seeing that as having almost no information.
So if psychedelics work on dimensions that cut across diagnosis, how do you design a trial that captures that signal? And is the field actually doing this yet? And can you reintroduce the notion of domain versus indication?
There have been a lot of effort put into the creation of domains of function. And the most important effort was done by research domain criteria at NIH. And then industry tried to use this approach to run the trials transdiagnostically, where the indication would be sought relatively later, while in phase 2A and even at proof of concept, there would be attempts to be diagnosis agnostic and use the domain to focus on domain. And then if you see the signal on domain, then you would have a choice of indication to pursue. This, in the industry, at least where I have been at Pfizer, we have been doing it in a very preliminary way, and there haven't been any success to talk about. In the most advanced approach was actually done with the former Eli Lilly compound, and that was anhedonia fast mass trial. That was the most advanced one. That the issue is what that signal that was shown in this trial didn't somehow it didn't translate into phase 3. And the medication was stopped, I believe, at phase 3. And this approach was sort of, the people became gun shy sort of they don't use the approach. However, I think that it has a future. It's an inevitable that it has a future, because there should be better things than just to define it by DSM criteria. And I know that I believe that DSM is right now being reworked. We will see what will happen with the rework of the DSM. And
with the idea of domain index in mind, or with a redefinition of indications?
We don't know that. I don't know. Like, I cannot comment on that. I would say that maybe they would be easier to use a domain, because some domains, especially positive variance domain of research domain criteria that was recently updated, looks very good. And you could actually create trials, taking fast mass as an approach. And that would be very interesting to do, let alone that psychedelics, they are, this as a field, they are in search of the characterization of who responds to them. As you have noted, maybe you have been reading about recent COMP 006 conversation going on. One of the investors, I believe it was an investor, asked that are there any clues about who actually respond to psilocybin? Remember that question? I think Olson, asked. And the response from Levine was that they don't know that yet. So that's sort of the future. That's what I recall from reading what happened Tuesday morning. And that tells you something also, mentioning more, if you have noticed that the COMP 006, how they shared the results. They said that the people who already responded, the percentage which has already responded, then they went into the next stage, and that's where they developed the remission. So it's not like, from ground zero. It's those who responded, then they progressed to remission. It's very interesting to know what those people are, and who would actually be the subpopulation that responds well.
But the FDA still approves by indication. So how do you reconcile a diagnosis-agnostic development strategy with a regulatory framework that wasn't built for it? How do you move forward with the domain strategy when the approval is designed for indication only?
I think that the industry has found a way to deal with it. And the way how industry is dealing with it, again, this is just me looking at the field, right? Is that they understand that the effect is transdiagnostic, and they run sequential or parallel programs for indications that affect same domain. So they, for example, do MDD, they do GAD, they do PTSD. Those are indications that are sort of affecting the same domain, and that's how they do that. They use the DSM, but they actually try to, they base their decision on the signal in the domain that they see it previously, early on, I would say. And that's how they deal with it. And unless something will change with the next iteration of DSM, maybe there still be opportunity to run diagnosis agnostic phase 2A, phase 2B, and then run several programs in parallel, and enrich them for, hopefully, enrich them for the populations that would correspond to the domain where the signal is.
So you mean within the phase 2, a sub trial, a mini trial for the
Right.
domain nested into the
I would
phase
say
2?
it's mini. I think it will be a big trial because you will need to do the continuum like FastMass did, right? But then again, you prepare for your phase 3, and then the phase 3 you will be at DSM level, but you could do several programs at the same time, already based only on DSM. Again, I would say that this is the approach that is possible for a big pharma because it's difficult to run several programs at the same time. And but we will see how the smaller companies will deal with it. Compass is running, I believe, PTSD and MDD, so they managed to do that. It's just this is a good example that not only big pharma can do such things, but also medium to small pharma can do that also, given clever approaches to clinical development plans.
But that psychedelic effect on domains such as in anhedonia or positive or negative valence, that just exposes a flaw in the design of trials, because the trials are made by pharmacologists and the approval, I mean, the DSM is written by psychiatrists. So that's it's that meeting, that approval, that confrontation moment that doesn't really fit together. It's that the rationale for domains could also apply for SSRIs and other molecules, but
That's true.
the psychedelics have such a strong effect that they expose really that flaw in the system.
That's true. The sort of where they meet in each other, it's the level of symptoms. And as you know, that there are some psychiatric schools that are strong on symptoms, and those who are less strong on symptoms. But where the crux of the matter is where the clinical meets with the other aspects, what's designed by pharmacologists, that would be at the level of symptoms, constructs, and also behavioral tasks. That what's research domain criteria are about. And in that respect, there are other issues that we haven't been understanding well with psychedelics, and that should be of interest. And I can tell you that what comes to my mind is that since we're talking about PK and PD, is that psychedelics effect are far beyond and above those PK effects. The half-life is very short. The drug is not on board very quickly. However, the effects are much longer than that. And, there have been an explanation to that, where it starts a cascade of neuroplasticity. But where is this magic switch? At which point there is that neuroplasticity start? I don't know. Could tell you that for serotonergic antidepressants, there was a sort of a ballpark situation with PET, right? So you would have cert occupancy at 80%. And so then you would say that, okay, so that's where I am and I'm going to have an effect. With psychedelics, you are not doing it at steady state. There's no continuous receptor occupancy. What you do is just ping the receptor, right? And so then you don't know how long centrally psychedelics are staying even, are they central or not? We don't know that. There are some publications that touch upon that matter from, I believe, Josh Siegel published on that. And also
The synchronization?
And Dosenbach a little bit. But that's interesting aspect of psychedelics. Look, where is that switch that at which point, when psychedelic pings the receptors, for example, psilocybin, we are at about 72%, I believe, receptor occupancy. But again, this is not at steady state. This is just pinning the receptor and then it goes away and we don't know what happens. And why people have, I'm going back to the A-Day publication, why people have all those changes in life, major changes in life. They have been shown, at least in his hands, he has shown that it depends on how many times people take psychedelics. So then that is important. Then educational level also, I think, is important in terms of major life changes. But this is an area that would be very interesting to explore.
Now, if we look at PTSD, after the MDMA setback, where does PTSD stand as an indication for psychedelic development? Is there a credible path forward?
Certainly, I would say, because when there was that issue with MDMA, again, it was an issue in respect to the program itself. It wasn't an issue about PTSD as an indication. And I'm not going to go into the details. Everybody read about those details. I could only just quote a very famous individual who recently said that the whole difference between success and failure is an execution. Okay, so if you think about this catchy phrase, you can understand that the FDA was concerned about execution of the program itself. And that's, I think, where the issue was for the FDA, but certainly not as with PTSD as an indication. Therefore, I would say there is a future. There is a methylone that was acquired by Otsuka. And I would say that if they're in the hands of an experienced pharma with a cleaner molecule, we could have a chance.
So back to MDD trial design. If you were designing a psilocybin MDD trial from scratch today, no legacy constraints, what would you do differently from what's been run so far? And what's the hurdle people in the field aren't talking about enough?
What would I do differently? I would say that we all have heard that the differentiating feature that is very important that with psychedelics, we don't over-medicate people, right? So people are not taking medications like once or twice a day indefinitely. They have certain a session or two, and then they kind of they feel the effect. Looking at the COMPASS data, of course, in TRD is the indication that is nested within MDD. Just think about that. And so, if this is the major feature that differentiates serotonergic, classical serotonergic antidepressants from psychedelics, then why wouldn't we make this a primary endpoint? Meaning the durability of effect. The durability of effect could be a primary endpoint expressed as a continuous measure. Response and remission rate categoricals, they could be secondary endpoints. And the cherry on the torta would be that I would be having as an exploratory, I would be having an array of mechanisms that exploring the sociofunctional gains. And of course, the duration of that trial is going to be a longer one. It could be
5 years or?
Yeah, well, I mean, right now we have trials 52 weeks, open label, right? Then the certain amount of re-administration, so why not? And that would be very important to see what life changes people are having, that they're saying that just, all their issues have been resolved and they have fantastic response and that sort of thing. That's very important to see what do they do with their lives beyond the, for example, Sheehan disability scale, right? So that's that's what I would do differently. Of course, that would have an effect perhaps on the label. However, at least in the clinical trial section, that could be also, somehow addressed. So I would do the durability of effect and the modus of re-administrations primary.
We've talked about COMP006 a little bit, but what's your read on the recent top-line data that Compass Pathways shared yesterday, I believe?
Well, I need talking carefully. It's amazing. They have done an amazing job. They have run almost like classical, so many exposures program in a very difficult indication. So kudos to them for doing that. Very impressive. And they have done all they could and even more. And in COMP006, there are several things that could have been sort of shared more, should I say, so that people, for example, would be able to comprehend what's the effect size in COMP006. In COMP005, there was a standard deviation. I believe that I haven't seen it for COMP006. Maybe I have missed it. So anyway, that's important. Then what's important is that the interesting thing that they have created that hasn't been done in typical antidepressant programs, that they have created the sort of a combination of partial responders and responders, like their MADRS more equal 25%. That's kind of a combination of typical two sort of flavors of responders. So they have created it as a one bucket. And so to characterize the response, that is interesting. And of course, nobody could blame them if the partial doesn't sound good, right? So it's kind of partial. So they call it that it's substantial enough, or whatever verbiage they used, that those two parts of the antidepressant response, they view them together. The other topic is of importance is that they haven't shown us the remission rate. I remember we were trying to beat the venlafaxine remission rate with the sertraline plus approaches. That was very hard. And here I see that they showed us responders at week 6. And then from those responders, 30% achieved remission. So this is not a direct response rate. This is not direct remission rate. This is a remission rate in those who responded. Okay, so it's different.
It's kind of a biased remission, yeah.
So it's kind of it's third of the third. That's an important
detail, yeah.
Signal. So that shows you where it's all heading. And that's why I said when designing the study, if I would have been designing, the durability of effect would be important to have as a primary, and then you would need to show in whom using deep phenotyping approaches, because you see that they have 38% responded, and from those 38%, you see that there is a subpopulation forming, and then the same people, 30% of them made remission. So again, even investors asked, what are those people? You know, do you have any information that that's important?
Yeah, very interesting. So 3 years from now, what's the one approval or data readout that will define whether this field succeeded or stalled?
I'm assuming we'll be seeing approvals in the TRD. Looks like, as I said, there is a lot of tailwind. And so we will see how for me, it will be like how it all will roll out. I would say that a lot depends on things like DEA rescheduling, and a lot depends on how RAMS is going to be. These are two important parts. Remember, we were talking about those functional changes that came in later down the road. That they would show up, I assume, in the RAMS, for example. Who knows? And with DEA rescheduling, that the market uptake will affect the market uptake. And that would show us where the field is going. Because, for example, if we have an approval, but there is not much of a market uptake, or there are some issues in the RAMS, so that would be important to look at.
So the opportunity, the psychedelic opportunity, could be smothered in phase 4, for example.
Right. Right. Could become a niche, you know, as I said, for those people for whom it really works.
Or those who can afford.
30% of those who can afford it. And then on top of everything, you have DEA. I hope that it will be rescheduled. There was a factor 8 publication from Jack Henningfeld from Johns Hopkins. And they clearly stated that for psilocybin, the rescheduling should be like, they stated that they wrote that it's like at least Schedule 4. So maybe we will have this help from this publication and other works that would help the DEA to move on that. So market uptake will determine whether it's going to be a success and transformational, or it's going to be niche treatment.
All right, thank you so much. One last question for you, Tanya. What's next for you?
For me, I'm consulting. So for people who believe that execution is the one thing that separates success from failure, they're welcome. Welcome to contact me. And I have a fantastic team of individuals who work with me. And we certainly can take on any challenge and make it a success. We pride ourselves on execution. The other thing is that, of course, I cannot move away from science. I'm looking in the areas where I would say the psychedelic field underinvested, and I can't share it right now. But I can tell you that I'm looking in that direction, and if there will be an opportunity to move that direction, then I'm an innovative drug developer. You will see some activity from me there as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tanya, for your time and insights. Extremely valuable. And thank you again for agreeing to participate. Stay with me on the line. I'm just gonna wrap up this episode of Cascades Analytics Live. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any question, you can DM me on LinkedIn. You can also check Tanya Ramey's latest piece for cascadesanalytics.com about domain versus DSM the case for domains on our website. Thank you so much, and see you next week for our live interview with Rachel Yehuda of Mount Sinai.